This is Radio Now 95.3 FM. Come for the news, stay for informed conversations.
The International Monetary Fund, IMF, says Nigeria needs to improve its budgetary process and increase its cash transfers as a means of removing millions of citizens from poverty. This advice is contained in the IMF's 2025 Article 4 consultation report that assesses the economic health of its member countries. Joining the conversation this morning is Adegboyega Adebajo. He's an economist. Mr. Adebajo, good morning. Thank you for joining us on the conversation.
Good morning, Stephen. It's always a pleasure to be here with you.
Glad to have you with us. Let's start off with your reactions to the IMF's report, and particularly what it says to Nigeria.
Well, it's not unexpected, actually, because the annual consultation report looks at the trend. It's not just for that year, but whatever the findings are in that particular year compared with previous years. And I think in terms of setting a background, it's important to state that the IMF team doesn't just meet with government officials, but they also meet with the private sector, the academia, labor unions, and the civil service organizations in the country. And that's why these consultations come out as a robust set of recommendations. Now, it's not a critique because they're pretty much aware of the fact that when a budget goes live, there are many things that can actually affect the implementation and the effectiveness of the budget. And so this report highlights certain aspects. First of all, is the fact that there are revenue challenges to the budget, which may bring about constraints. And these are essentially because the income flow may not be as expected. A few weeks back, we were all a bit excited when Israel and Iran were at it because oil prices shot up. But, that only lasted just a week, a few days. And we're back to pre-incident levels, I should say. And so also our production of oil is not as high as we had estimated it would be in the budget. So halfway through the year, it's important we start realizing that we may not hit the revenue target. In addition, the tax reforms are not due to even commence till 2026. And the reason why I say even commence is because it would take some time for the build-up of the tax reforms to achieve the kind of revenue it's supposed to set. So this is one of the reasons why the IMF has said, look, you need to rethink your spending, and we think it's better you cut down on recurrent expenditure rather than the kind of capital expenditure that will generate growth. And whilst you're at it, please think of the people. So ensure that there are social safety nets for poverty. Do cash transfers where you can. Try to protect the most vulnerable and try to make growth as more inclusive as possible.
So, Mr. Adebajo, it's interesting that when you look at the grouping for the recommendation, the IMF starts off with fiscal policy, right? And that speaks to what you've just started saying or what you've ended on, which is the point around how the government spends. There's questions on whether the federal government has the ability to not coordinate, but get the buy-in of the subnationals on the matter of fiscal policy as well. Because every time we hear that federal allocation, FAC, has been dispersed to the states, cynics in professional spaces talk about reckless spending by the subnationals in particular. Do you think that there's a possibility, some sort of policy or the other, that the center can institute that brings everybody sort of on board and in line with one goal?
Well, I expect that once we have the fiscal reforms, tax reforms actually fully in effect from January 1st, 2026, we will see a fair degree of collaboration. There is a body that's called the Joint Tax Board, well, now called the National Tax Board, as it were. And this body has representatives from all the states. and it tends to meet regularly to harmonize and to see to it that there is not as much double taxation. One is hoping that the kind of leadership which we will find in the tax sector right now will be so much more different from what we had in the past, will be more active. And you're right to talk about fiscal policy, because it seems that everything is going on well with respect to monetary policy. And unless and until there can be that balance, it's a delicate balance, because sometimes as monetary policy gives a positive impact, fiscal policy tends to be on the negative, and vice versa. So it's always a delicate balancing act. But then our fiscal policy isn't even where it needs to be to make the impact that's necessary at this stage.
So this begs the sort of, if you like, actions that we need to start seeing from the government. And just to put a few things into perspective, in this report, there are estimations about the poverty rate in Nigeria. And as of 2025, this year, we're estimated to have hit maybe 50% of the population in poverty. And that estimate increases, it rises incrementally, small increments, but it does rise till 2027. And they mention things around food security in particular. They mention, then eventually they start to mention health, they mention education and whatnot. But food security is quite important, because it then it gives us an idea of where they think the government should be placing a lot more effort. What sort of actions do you expect us to see from the President, the Minister of Agriculture and Food Security, and perhaps other coordinating ministries and agencies that would help sort of shore up this particular direction?
Well, one of the first things, we need to bear in mind is that inflation hasn't been fully tamed yet. Yes, it's about 10% lower, but above 20%, on a month-to-month basis, year-on-year basis. You dare say that in about a year and a half or two, prices may have actually doubled at the rate at which we are moving currently. If that's the case, and individual incomes aren't increasing at such a rate, then a lot more people will drop into beneath the poverty line. Now, that is a projection, and that's why we can sit here in 2025 and say this is what 2027 would look like if things don't change. I wouldn't say the prayer, because the prayer is in its own realm. So the action that's needed to be taken by the government is to ensure that this doesn't happen. You did mention food security, and it's important that there's a deliberate effort made to ensure that people are able to afford the basics. Cash transfers may be something, but money is fungible and may not necessarily be spent on food. GDP per capita is shrinking, continues to decline. So when we look at the IMF's recommendations from a holistic perspective, you can see that there's an intention to try to slow down the rate at which inflation goes. And fiscal policy can do that, because it's through fiscal policy that you're going to try to make sure that there's a lot more money in the hands of the people at the bottom of the pyramid. And that's why taxation at that level has been reduced, and in some cases down to the level of zero. And maybe the earlier we start to apply these, the better. You did speak to the subnationals. One would expect that there's enough education provided on the importance of working in tandem with the federal government's own fiscal policy at state levels to enable governors and commissioners for finance actually ensure that they implement the same type of systems, social safety net, and growth initiatives in their state.
Right. Mr. Adebajo, thank you very much for your time and expertise on this conversation. Adegboyega Adebajo is an economist who joined us this morning to speak on the IMF International Monetary Fund's advice to Nigeria as part of its August consultation reports. advising the country to review its budgetary practices and work harder to ensure that more Nigerians are lifted out of poverty. You're still listening to Radio Now 95.3 FM Lagos. We urge you to stay tuned. The conversations continue right here on Now Breakfast.
This is Radio Now 95.3 FM. Come for the news, stay for informed conversations.